The rain beat against the windows of the small terraced house in Battersea, London, as if it were desperate to get inside. It was a cold, unforgiving night in 1956, and the streets were slick with a dark, oily sheen that made them glisten under the faint glow of the streetlights. Inside the house, 63 Wetcliff Road, a family huddled together in the living room, their eyes wide with fear, their breaths shallow. The cold was creeping in, but it wasn't just the chill from outside. There was something else, something darker, something that lingered in the corners and crept along the floorboards like a silent, malevolent shadow. Shirley Hitchings, a young girl of 15, sat curled up on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, her fingers gripping the fabric of her skirt tightly. She could feel it, the presence. It was always there, lurking, watching. At first, it had been just small things, a missing hairbrush, a book moved from its place, an unfamiliar cold spot in the hall. But then, the noises began. It started with a soft tapping, a rhythmic knock that seemed to come from the walls themselves. At first, her father, Wally, had blamed it on the pipes, the old plumbing of their aging home, but the knocking grew louder, more insistent, until it became a banging, a sound so sharp and sudden that it made their hearts jump in their chests. They would sit in silence, waiting, listening, and the house would answer. "Dad," Shirley whispered, her voice trembling, barely louder than the rain outside. "Do you hear it?" Wally Hitchings nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the ceiling above, where the banging seemed to be coming from. "Yes, love," he said, his voice low, tight with fear. "I hear it." The noises grew louder, a cacophony of bangs, knocks, and scratches that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Shirley could feel it deep in her bones, a vibration that seemed to resonate in her very soul. She clapped her hands over her ears, trying to block it out, but it was inside her head now, filling her with a sense of dread she could not shake. Her mother, Kitty, crossed herself and muttered a prayer under her breath, her hands shaking as she clutched her rosary. "It's not natural," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "It's something evil." And then, as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The room fell into an uneasy silence, the kind of silence that seemed to hold its breath. Shirley slowly lowered her hands from her ears, her body trembling. She looked around, her eyes wide, searching the shadows. "Maybe it's gone," she whispered, half to herself, half to the room. But the moment the words left her lips, the banging resumed, louder than before, more insistent, as if angered by their audacity. The pictures on the walls shook, the floorboards creaked, and the furniture seemed to shudder with every strike. Shirley's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat that matched the rhythm of the knocking. She could feel the presence moving through the house, cold and angry, like a storm trapped within these four walls. "Leave us alone," she cried, her voice breaking, her fear spilling out like water from a cracked dam. "Please, just leave us alone." But the house only laughed in reply, a low, mocking laugh that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. The air grew colder, and the lights flickered, dimming to a dull, eerie glow. Shirley could see her breath in the air now, a misty cloud that hung in front of her face. The room seemed to darken, the shadows growing deeper, longer, stretching toward her like fingers. And then, the voice. A whisper, so faint, so soft she almost thought she imagined it. "Shirley," it hissed, a sound like the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. "Shirley." Her blood ran cold. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat. The air seemed to grow heavier, the room colder still. The voice laughed again, a hollow, echoing sound that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "You know me," it breathed. "You've always known me." Shirley's hands clutched at the armrest, her knuckles white. "What do you want?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling. The room seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the shadows twisting and swirling. "I want." The voice paused, as if considering. "I want to play." A sudden crash came from the kitchen, followed by the sound of plates shattering. Wally jumped to his feet, his face pale, his eyes wide. "Stay here," he muttered to his family, though his voice lacked confidence. He moved cautiously toward the kitchen, each step slow, deliberate. Shirley watched him disappear into the darkened room. For a moment there was silence again, and then a scream, sharp and terrified. Wally stumbled back into the living room, his face a mask of shock. "The knives," he gasped. They were flying. And then, as if to confirm his words, a kitchen knife flew out from the dark, embedding itself in the wall just inches from Shirley's head. She screamed, covering her face with her hands. The room exploded into chaos. Dishes flew, chairs overturned, the lights flickered wildly. The entity was angry now, furious. It moved through the room like a whirlwind, an unseen force that seemed to tear at the very fabric of their reality. Shirley felt it then, deep inside her, an intense, burning cold that spread through her veins. She doubled over, clutching her stomach as a new searing pain tore through her. Her vision blurred, and she saw it, standing before her, a figure, dark and shadowy, with eyes like burning coals. It reached out to her, its fingers long and skeletal, its mouth stretching into a cruel, twisted smile. "Come with me," it whispered, its voice a low, hypnotic hum. "Come play in the dark." Shirley screamed, a high, piercing scream that seemed to shake the very walls. The entity laughed, a deep, rumbling laugh that filled the room, filled her head, filled her very soul. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The room fell into silence, the air still and heavy. Shirley collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Her family rushed to her side, their faces pale with fear. They knew, as they held her close, that this was only the beginning. The poltergeist had found them, chosen them, and it would not let go easily. From that night on, the house was never quiet. The banging, the laughter, the cold spots, the shadows, they became a part of their daily lives, an ever-present reminder that they were not alone. The entity played its games, its twisted, terrifying games, always watching, always waiting. And Shirley, each night, would lie in her bed staring into the darkness, waiting for the whisper that always came. "Shirley, Shirley," it would call, a soft, mocking voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Come play." And she would close her eyes, pulling the covers tight around her, praying for the dawn, praying for a peace that seemed forever beyond her reach.